RWBY is a series that I have an interesting relationship with. I got into the show for one and only one reason, and that was I was already a fan of the creator of the series, Monty Ohm. If there's one thing that I am an absolute sucker for, it's cool fights, and Monty had delivered that and more in his work. My personal favorite of his will always be MacLeod, but that might be bias on my part, because Samus is the ultimate best girl. So, when I saw the Red trailer for the first time, I lost my mind. It was so cool. I was so excited to get to see Monty make an anime. It seemed like the natural next step in his career. My excitement dipped a little on hearing the voice acting in the Black trailer. It seemed a little bit clunky, and that kind of continued into Yellow, but everything else was so cool, I really didn't let it put me off watching the show. My enthusiasm took a further hit upon the show starting, and it seemed that it would be a school anime. Not that the setting is always a bad one, it just typically isn't my cup of tea. Quick aside, the first thing I said when I saw Beacon for the first time was, "Oh, that place is getting Hogwartsed," and I am unreasonably and obnoxiously proud of being right about that to this day. I had thought before the series aired that it was going to be a show about 4 monster hunters in a cool, edgy, fairy tale-inspired world. Again, though, despite not the show being exactly what I thought it was going to be when I saw the trailers, I gave it the benefit of the doubt. There was no point in disliking the show right off the bat because I had misinterpreted the information given to me, and there was no point in resenting the show for not being my preferred genre. If the school stuff bothered me too much, I figured I'd just stop watching, but I really wanted to give the show a fair chance. I ended up concluding that the show was good. Not great, but the fights were awesome, I liked the characters, and it seemed like there were some really interesting ideas planned for the future. Not everything was a hit with me. The comedy very rarely made me laugh, and the dialogue at times sounded like an alien's vague approximation of how human beings interact. But the things I liked were enough to keep me coming back, and I found it enjoyable to watch, and it was fun speculating on things like what fairy tale characters we'd see in the future. You probably guessed where this was headed the moment I mentioned the reason I got into the show was because of Monty. My passion dipped quite a bit after he passed away, and some of that was due to my personal difficulty separating my own feelings from the media I consume. I've never been good at that, and so there was an element of sadness upon watching Volume 3. But also, I was watching a tournament arc in a show that I had loved the fights in, and suddenly the choreography really wasn't what it used to be. By the way, I'm not shitting on the animation staff who work on this show, nor am I saying that Monty is the only one in the world who can make a cool fight. Of course that's not true. These were just my feelings at the time. I probably would have dropped the show after Volume 3. It didn't suddenly suck now, I just wasn't feeling enthusiastic about it. But there was a teensy little problem with that. If you are watching my channel right now, there's a good chance that you found me through one or both of my very talented friends, The Judgmental Critter and Twins Inc. One glance through those channels and you'll see that they are very passionate about RWBY, and when two of your best friends are very passionate about something, they talk about it a lot, and you want to talk about it with them, and so you keep watching. Yeah, the entire reason I stuck around was because of my friends, and while I'm glad about that now, I really wasn't at the time, because after Volume 3 came Volumes 4 and 5, which I really didn't enjoy. With Volume 3, I can safely say that while I didn't enjoy it, I was aware that it was technically pretty good. Yeah, the fights didn't look as cool, and I had to look at Cinder in her bandage shirt, but the storytelling was vastly improved, and the fall of Beacon was a great way to shake things up. But I really struggle to see the good in Volumes 4 and 5. Volume 4's pacing felt plodding and miserable, with the only remotely interesting part ending almost as quickly and unceremoniously as it began. But any notions I had of Volume 4 being my least favorite in the show were quickly corrected by the release of Volume 5. From the moment the first episode started to reveal a lovely piece of concept art instead of an actual scene, to the grand finale in which a big old room chock full of people with superpowers and magic fighting each other somehow managed to have nearly all of the fighting take place off screen, it became clear that there might be some budget issues this time around, and I felt like the volume really suffered because of it. The reason why I'm starting this video with this long-ass preamble is to give you an idea of my feelings on the show when Volume 6 began. Unless you got to this video by wildly clicking around on YouTube while wearing a blindfold, you'll have seen the title and would have been able to deduce that by this point I was feeling more than a little burnt out on the show. I wanted you to have the full picture so you would understand that it wasn't just me suddenly despising the show, but more of a gradual weathering of enthusiasm. By the time Volume 6 started, my engagement was so low that just loading up the first episode was an honest-to-God chore, an obligation more than anything else. I had absolutely no expectations at that point, no hopes for the volume or anything like that. My only wish was that it wouldn't be boring. And I guess wishes do come true. Wonder if there was a blue fairy listening and get it? It's like the star thing. Did you get it? I had mixed feelings on the first few episodes. I was pretty enthralled by the Salem and Ozma backstory episode, but the fallout after that left me feeling frustrated. But then we got to the Apathy. And before we get started diving into the meat of this mini arc, I just wanted to note really quickly that I am well aware that the Apathy episodes aren't perfect, and this video isn't about me trying to convince you that they are. I don't think that they're perfect, but I do think that they are marvelously entertaining, and that's what I'm hoping to highlight today. So, grab yourself a warm drink and settle in for what I'm going to call a Halloween episode because it's October and the Apathy is scary, and that's about all the connection that there is. The story begins in episode 5, The Coming Storm, and I completely forgot that it starts out with Neo and Cinder fighting. Just gonna skip this bit, and okay, here we are. The setting is Brunswick Farms, a seemingly abandoned locale featuring several big farmhouses, a storage shed, and a well. There is a snowstorm raging, and visibility is terrible. Our heroes take refuge in one of the homes, and the interior they find is dark and oppressive. Warmer than the outside, but nevertheless unnerving. In a search for blankets, the home becomes even more inhospitable when they find out that underneath the blankets are bodies. Let's backtrack a little bit to earlier in the volume. This episode follows right after the team just got into a bit of a nasty disagreement with each other. They've just learned that their quest to defeat the big bad might not be possible. Their nemesis, Salem, has been revealed to be immortal. Even worse, Ozpin, who has largely called the shots and has been guiding the heroes, knew about this the whole time, but never revealed this information to anyone. In his defense, he still thinks that they should fight against Salem and just wanted everyone to have hope. Fair enough, the heroes shouldn't be giving up trying to protect the world just because there isn't a cut and dry solution. Even so, the confidence of the team has been shaken. Not only are things going to be a lot harder than it initially seemed, but they fear that trusting Ozpin at all was a mistake if he's willing to hide such important information from them. In particular, Yang and Crow take the news especially hard. Yang already had doubts about Oz after learning that he apparently has the ability to bestow magic upon others, a feat that should be impossible in this world. Crow, on the other hand, has always been shown to be incredibly devoted to Oz. When Ozpin was killed in battle and reincarnated into Oscar, Oz directed Oscar to seek out Crow specifically, despite the fact that he had several other people in his inner circle who also could have helped. And Crow had his cane, and he needed that. So while Yang is angry from an I told you so sort of mindset, Crow is furious because this was someone who he put all of his faith into, and being kept in the dark about this pivotal information is unacceptable to him. Funny thing is, I think Crow isn't so much distressed about the news that Salem is immortal as he is on not being let in on that knowledge, but that's just speculation on my part. As a very quick aside, because it's something that really bothered me and I wouldn't feel good about glazing over it, in this scene where Crow is at his breaking point, he strikes Ozpin. Except he doesn't just strike Ozpin because remember, Oz is currently sharing the body of a teenager. So Ozpin did the bad thing and received the punch, but when Ozpin's consciousness temporarily retreats after this altercation, Oscar visibly winces. The pain didn't just vanish because they traded places. I really wish that this had been discussed in the show. I'm okay with characters lashing out and making mistakes. Crow's anger was clearly directed at Oz and not Oscar. But nothing ever comes of this, and Crow never apologizes or even acknowledges that his actions hurt a kid who trusted him. Sorry, I know that that's a bit of a distraction. My point is, tensions are high right now in this group. This is important because, back to the coming storm, it means it isn't at all strange or out of place where in the little quiet moments the characters start to question their reasons for carrying on. Yang is still in a bad mood and rolling her eyes and grumbling when she's asked to help. She later confides to Blake that she's feeling tired. Weiss asks RWBY if they're really still going to Atlas. What's the point? The only reason they were going there in the first place was under Ozpin's orders. Why do they still want to do that? She also mentions that she's tired. Everyone seems irritable or unhappy, and the only ones who are relatively unaffected are RWBY and Maria, although RWBY is clearly feeling a bit down. This episode is largely just set up, with the only direct confirmation that there is something dangerous in the house being a small moment where the door to the wine cellar momentarily cracks open. It's atmosphere, dark hallways, and an uncommon amount of scenes with no background music at all. I love the way the next episode, Alone in the Woods, starts, with RWBY quietly fretting over her team's obvious stress and low mood. Her fretting extends to her uncle, who seems to be drinking even more than usual. He observes that the storm seems to be clearing up and tells her to get everyone to bed and that he'd be waking them up at sunrise to get them moving, as none of them feel very safe in the house and are eager to leave. Unfortunately, RWBY wakes up the next day with the sun high in the sky. Upon checking on Crow, it becomes clear that the man has been unable to control himself in his current mental state in a house fully stocked with alcohol. 3 bottles of wine in one night is a bad call, especially with how skinny Crow is. It's concerning, and RWBY is rightfully upset when she wakes him. I do like how she gives him a hug here, though. It makes it clear that she's not angry at him, she's worried for him. It's nice. Nobody seems happy to be awake and out in the sunshine, which I relate to on a deep and personal level. I enjoy this scene more than I should just because Oscar and Blake's grumbling is really funny to me. It makes them feel like whiny kids on a camping trip that only their parents are excited about. It's really adorable. Everyone is in a foul mood, and it only escalates when Crow's stinky bad luck foot goes and pops the tire on the flatbed. Just like in the previous episode, things feel uncomfortably quiet, with almost no background music and only very quiet environmental noise. As our heroes once again start to question their motivation, Oscar says the phrase, "We signed up to try and save the world, not just delay the inevitable." And at that moment, a slow, droning piece starts to play, and it's almost like a heartbeat. Everyone's eyes are beginning to droop from exhaustion, both physical and emotional. What is the point of continuing on their quest when they could hide the relic that they were planning to take to Atlas here? Would anyone be able to find a single small lantern at the bottom of a well in the middle of nowhere anytime soon? This is important because for a moment we get to see RWBY have doubt. Throughout the show, RWBY has always been willing to take initiative, perhaps the closest character we have to the embodiment of Monty's motto, "Keep moving forward." Even during these episodes, she's the character keeping everyone else moving. Last episode, when Yang adamantly stated that there was no way that they could get comfortable in a house where they found dead bodies, RWBY is the one to propose that they search the house for supplies that they can use. This episode, when the tire goes flat, she keeps her cool and notes that there must be a spare somewhere. I think these episodes are some of the best in the series at showing why RWBY is a good leader for her team. So in this moment, when we see her falter for the first time, it's meaningful. And even more meaningfully, she takes a moment to compose herself and changes her mind on her own accord before seeing some glowing red eyes and dropping the lantern out of pure shock. This scene could have easily been less impactful by having the eyes be what startles RWBY out of her apathetic state, and I'm glad that instead, the decision was made to give RWBY agency and for her to make the decision to keep the lamp made of her own will. Also, it really shouldn't be because it's pretty easy to see it coming, but every time I watch this scene, my heart does a little jump at the stinger here. I actually had the video paused at this part, and when I came back to it, it was just a nasty little surprise waiting for me, like seeing a spider in the middle of the night. The rest of her team volunteers to go down with RWBY to retrieve the lamp, as she's firm in stating that she will not leave the farm without it. Crow demands that Oscar fix the tire before leaving to drink some more, and Maria continues to flip through one of the diaries she found in the house. The bottom of the well takes the girl to a not at all suspicious series of tunnels, and I gotta admit that it looks a little PlayStation 2-y down here. That water is a bit especially around the rocks. You can see the texture just going like straight through, but the dark atmosphere is lovely and it makes some good use of Dutch angles as well. Look at that drawing, that is some good art there. This scene is done really well because you don't get to linger on the image of the apathy just yet. You can only see what's in Maria's book for a brief moment before the scene cuts away, but not before you get to see the name of the Grimm, the Apathy. Let's dissect the Apathy, because they are a fascinating idea, especially in a show where nearly all of the Grimm are essentially different reskins of the same monster with the same behavior patterns. The Apathy are somewhat similar to Redeads from the Legend of Zelda series. They're slow-moving and have a bone-chilling scream that can freeze you in place. However, by far their most interesting quality is their passive ability that makes you feel apathetic. This is fascinating for a lot of reasons, most obvious among them that death from ennui is a very unique threat to overcome. It's a really clever idea, far more interesting than something like Dementors sucking out happiness or souls, at least in my opinion. But even more interesting is the way that the story is told around them. In RWBY, the Grimm are drawn to negative human emotions, a fact that the villains have used to their advantage numerous times. This is an interesting idea, but it creates some problems with the world building. Things don't always add up when watching the show with this fact in mind, and there are numerous moments that can be picked apart to show that this is an element that really only surfaces when the plot needs it to. Furthermore, a society like this would likely need to have a massive focus on training people from a young age to remain calm under pressure, and to not antagonize each other without a damn good reason, for fear of attracting the man-eating monsters that are always lurking just out of sight. I don't think that this is an unforgivable detriment on the show's part, but it is definitely one of those ideas that's a bit undercooked. But this is one of the first times that this element is explored in a way that is far more interesting than bad guys stir up chaos to summon big monsters. In the diaries that Maria finds, the proprietor of Brunswick, Bartleby, states that the farm has been losing money, and fast. Inhospitable conditions and bad harvests lead to discontent and strife. That summons Grimm, and then even more money has to be spent paying huntsmen to protect the farm, money that they didn't have. But Bartleby had a plan. He discovered the Apathy roaming in a pack and was able to capture 2 of them and lock them in his wine cellar. His plan was simple. The presence of the Apathy would keep everyone in a calm state, thus negating the need for huntsmen. Without the additional cost of hiring protection, and with no need to worry about Grimm, the farm could focus on getting back on its feet. In theory, it isn't a terrible idea, and it implies that the mental effect of the Apathy is less serious in smaller numbers, especially when direct contact isn't being made. Bartleby's plan might have ended up working, but there was a fatal flaw. The hike home drained Bartleby. He was exhausted from the effort of being in such close contact with the Apathy for an extended period of time. While he was out capturing the 2, he had told his wife what seemed to be a decent excuse, and that he'd be out sealing the entrance to the underground waterways. It was a task that he put off when he got home because he was so tired. While he and everyone else slept, the rest of the Apathy tracked their lost members through those very same waterways. The following day, he managed to muster up the energy to seal them off, but it was too late, and he ended up trapping the entire pack directly beneath the farm, sealing everyone's fate. Let's return to the scene where we left off. Maria chases after Team RWBY to warn them of the Grimm, but it's too late, they've been spotted. After a panicked attempt at an escape, they find themselves in the cellar and end up surrounded. The door is so close, but it's locked and they barely have enough energy to move, let alone smash the door open. Upon seeing Blake in trouble, RWBY's eyes let out a small flare of energy, enough to buy them a little time. This scene is incredible, maybe one of my favorites in the show so far. From her introduction, Maria has made it clear that her cybernetic eyes are damaged, although she isn't specific on the details. For the first time in this episode, we get to see what that means. Everything she sees has a hazy blue tint to it, and when RWBY tells her she has silver eyes, we see everything click. Maria's brief but powerful desire to protect speech is the first time since the fall of Beacon that this show gave me goosebumps. The ensuing escape felt earned, and Weiss burning down the house feels cathartic, and Crow's face when he sees the threat that he was too inebriated to notice is perfect. I fucking love this episode. I don't know if that was obvious, could you tell? This episode proved to me that Rooster Teeth can do it. A careful establishment of tone and setting, great pacing, excellent dialogue, especially compared to previous seasons, character writing that feels well thought out, no stupid jokes that make me wish I'd been born without ears, no music that tells me how to feel through its lyrics and instead allows me to feel it myself through its instrumentation. It's perfect. Remember when I said earlier that I was aware that it isn't actually perfect and it does still have flaws? Well, I lied. I tricked you. No, I didn't. Shit's subjective, man. What can you do? Make a dumb video about it trying to convince people you're right, I guess. I am certain that The Coming Storm and Alone in the Woods have their critics. I don't typically delve into RWBY fandom very often, but I poked around on the comments of the Rooster Teeth website for these videos, trying to find a bit of critique that I could analyze and see if it was a fair point or not, but I mostly just found people lamenting the way Rooster Teeth's site manages ads. Also, someone had a spoiler comment, and when I clicked on it to show spoilers, it said, "Haha, you've been rickrolled, son of a bitch." So, I ventured onto Reddit like a nervous kid on their first day at a new school and started nosing around to try and get an idea of how other people felt about this episode. It seems that most people regard it favorably, but I was able to find some critical points that I thought it would be interesting to bring up. The first point I'd like to mention is that the concept art for the Apathy, as well as the designs in Maria's book, are far scarier than the 3D models we see in the show. And yeah, that is very fair. I actually almost brought up this point myself, but I thought that the way the Apathy moved and were framed were enough to make up for their lack of actually looking scary, because yeah, they really don't. When you see a still image of them, they kind of just look like weird skinny Grimm. I think that in the attempt to make the Apathy look consistent with the other Grimm, we lost something of what made the concept art special. Take a look at the concept art by Aromi Kim, and I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that. It's a running theme of mine that I'm barely articulate. See how it hides most of the figures in the fog, and it gives you just enough information to trigger your fight or flight response? This style of art was inspired by my god king Stephen Gamble, long may he reign. Look at how beautiful this shit is. I might do an entire video on Stephen Gamble's art, but I'm worried that it would just be me screaming the whole time about how cool it is, so might not be a good idea. Sorry, back on topic. The models for the Apathy could use a little bit of work if the Rooster Teeth team really wants them to look unnerving, or if that seems too daunting, perhaps having it be a little bit more difficult to see them, like put them in some fog or smoke, like how the concept art portrayed them. And here's the other critique that I'll mention, which I should add was echoed in a few of the comments on the video itself. There is an argument that the Apathy stuff is just kind of padding, that it breaks the pace of the volume, it's fillery, and it's overall pretty disconnected with the rest of the volume. I understand where this sentiment is coming from, but I disagree that this episode was a waste of time. In fact, I wish we had more episodes like this. I think that sometimes in anime with overarching narratives, anything that distracts from the main plot can be seen as pointless time wasters. And in some instances, that's true. But I think that there is value in episodes that, while they may not be about the story as a whole, they expand upon the characters in interesting ways. I mentioned earlier that I really enjoyed RWBY's characterization in this episode. One of the biggest reasons for that is I find that the show can sometimes veer a little bit too much into the tell, don't show territory for its portrayal of RWBY as a leader. It can feel like she's the important one because she has the ultimate weapon eyes and not because of who she is as a person. But this episode shows us that she does have excellent leadership qualities. I don't know if RWBY's apparent resilience against the Apathy is due to her nature or because of her eyes. Maria seems a little bit less affected as well, so that could be a possible ability of Silver-Eyed Warriors that just went unmentioned. Either way, it was RWBY who pushed everyone to look for solutions instead of laying down and giving up. And since there wasn't a really important plot point to take up screen time, we got to see our main character kick ass in a way that, at least to me, felt earned. I think that this was also an important time for our heroes to be challenged. I'm not going to get into the whole hero's journey plot structure, but I will say that I do think it is very important in stories like these to have the main characters question themselves and doubt their course of action. With the introduction of a plot point like, you cannot kill the final boss, you'll need to think of another way to win, that is going to take a second to process. It was under the influence of Grimm, to be sure, but our heroes were tested in their willingness to continue. Should they keep going despite the now seemingly insurmountable odds, or do they take the easy route and turn back? Would it be selfish and wrong to potentially doom a future generation by leaving the lamp somewhere where it probably wouldn't be found for a very long time? Or would that actually have been a good call? Do you perhaps call needless attention to your special artifact by strapping it to one of the main character's hips? I'm glad that they had to think about it for a moment, and again, I'm thrilled that RWBY was able to resist it. Like, of course the characters in a story aren't going to say, fuck it, toss it into the sea, I want to go home, and then the credits just roll. But like, we gotta pretend. We knew that they weren't all going to get eaten by the Apathy either. It just wouldn't be a very satisfying story if it ended right there. But it's the possibility that makes it interesting. That got kind of meandering. Basically, I understand if this isn't your cup of tea because it felt fillery, but I enjoyed it, and I hope that you can at least understand why I think that way. Now that we're done with the critique section, welcome to the selfish section. Thank you for getting this far into the video, and selfish point number 1, I like horror. This episode may not have been terrifying, but it had some solid horror-themed elements. Horror in non-horror media is always a delight because it's unexpected. If you put on a scary movie, you're going in expecting to be frightened, but no one turns on an episode of RWBY for slow-moving, screaming ennui monsters. It's great. Honestly, I hope that Rooster Teeth at least considers doing some more episodes like this in the future. Don't wear it out, I mean, like don't try the exact same scenario, but I'd love to see them experiment with more horror-themed elements in the future. Please, for me. I am asking respectfully, please cater specifically to me, huge company. Selfish point number 2. I've mentioned how comedy doesn't usually work for me in RWBY. Sometimes it's the delivery, they'll linger on a moment for too long where it would have been funnier if they had just cut. Sometimes it's a goofy little sound effect that they add in that detracts more than it adds, and sometimes it's just Nora saying something really loud. I love you, baby. Please stop yelling in my old ears. They can't handle it. While these episodes don't have a ton of comedy, the funny moments were really cute and they actually got a chuckle out of me. Later in this same volume, Maria falls into a similar pitfall as Nora with her humor, but her understated sassy quips here are an absolute delight without overdoing it. And RWBY's genuine delight at finding food and Weiss's chagrin at it being canned food was also cute and funny. Good job, guys. Selfish point number 3, this set piece. I really like Brunswick Farm, and I like knowing where the characters are in relation to one another. This is probably the most selfish of my praise because it really has nothing to do with the overall quality of the setting, but I enjoyed the smaller scale environment that the characters were in. It made the story feel nice and personal. Which, I will admit, that does work a lot better in a small, scary side story as opposed to the big, epic battle plot, so I'm really not going to push for the team to relocate to the countryside anytime soon. I just think it's neat. Overall, I'm really grateful to these episodes existing because I didn't like feeling burnt out on RWBY. They left me feeling rejuvenated. Were all of the problems I had with the show repaired after this? No, of course not. But it did leave me feeling very hopeful for the future, and especially hopeful for Volume 8. I could be completely off base here, and if so, this video may soon feel very dated. But based on what we got to see in the cliffhanger for Volume 7, it seems possible that we might be getting another Volume 3 type situation, where the story really gets a chance to shake things up. I'm really excited to see what happens next, and I'm just glad that I care. I'm glad that I don't feel apathetic about it. I've been waiting to say that for the whole video. So yeah, go rewatch The Coming Storm and Alone in the Woods. They're good stuff. And if any of you want to draw some cool, scary fan art of the Apathy, or if you already have in the past, and then maybe you can tweet it at me so I can see it, that'd be cool. Just saying. It was all a trap to beg for art. Links to my stuff will be in the description. Like and subscribe if you wanna. See you next week. Love you, bye.